Welcome to All Sorts Podcast, your passport to the planet's most intriguing puzzles. Today, we're plunging into, a really fascinating phenomena, the mesmerizing mystery of singing sands. Imagine a beach, maybe, whispering secrets beneath your feet with this high-pitched squeak. Or picture the profound, resonant boom coming from a huge desert dune, like the earth itself is humming.
Yeah, it's quite something.
It's a soundscape that's somehow familiar, but also utterly strange.
It truly is. And, as we look through the sources you shared, it's clear these aren't just local legends or anything.
Right.
Reports of these sonic sands, they come from really diverse locations. You've got the famous dunes in California, like Kelso and Eureka, but also beaches in Japan, even stretches of coast in the UK. This global thing, it immediately tells you we're dealing with something, fundamental, not just some quirky local condition.
Absolutely. And the history woven through this is fascinating, too. Yeah. Like one of the older accounts you sent over mentions Marco Polo.
Oh, yeah. Centuries ago.
Yeah, centuries ago, encountering these eerie sounds in the Gobi Desert. And his descriptions, attributing the noises to spirits or maybe unseen battles.
Wow.
Just highlights how deeply these natural acoustics baffled early observers. So that kind of sets the stage for our own exploration, right?
Yeah.
And move past the myths and really try to understand the science behind these whispering dunes and sonorous shores.
And what's fascinating right off the bat, just looking at the range of your sources, is that even though we use this one term, singing sands, the actual mechanisms seem to be quite different depending on where you are. The environment matters.
Okay, let's start breaking that down then. What are the main categories of sound we should be thinking about?
Your sources make a pretty clear distinction. There are what we can call squeaking sands. You usually find those on beaches.
Right.
And then there are booming sands. Those are the deeper sounds, the ones linked to desert dunes.
The squeaking ones. High-pitched, you said.
Yeah, higher frequencies, generally above 500 hertz.
Right.
And the sound is typically short, triggered when you walk on it or disturb it somehow.
So that soundtrack to your beach walk might have this unexpected little squeak to it.
Exactly. Now, the booming sands, they're a whole different beast. Lower to medium frequencies, often below 100 hertz, though they can go up towards 500 hertz sometimes.
Okay.
And these sounds can be incredibly sustained, like lasting for minutes. And your sources consistently tie them to sand avalanches on the dunes.
Avalanches, wow.
Yeah, dramatic stuff. Some reports even suggest these booms can travel for, several kilometers. So it's a powerful acoustic event.
The scale is just incredible. So thinking about these very different sound profiles, what are the essential ingredients? What conditions do you actually need for sand to make these sounds? It can't just be any old sand pile, right?
No, not at all. Several key things need to line up, and your sources really hammer these points home. First, the physical properties of the sand grains themselves. They tend to be rounded, and the diameter falls in a specific range, typically 0.1 to 0.5 millimeters. One study you shared even pinpointed around 0.3 millimeters as particularly good for the booming sounds.
So shape and size are critical, almost like tuning the strings on an instrument precisely.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. Second, the composition often involves silica, although it's interesting some of your sources mention calcareous sands in Hawaii that also sing.
Oh, really? Not just silica.
Right. And those seem to need a certain amount of moisture, which kind of hints at how complex the interaction between the material and the environment is.
And speaking of moisture, it sounds like it's a really delicate balance. Too much or too little could just stop the singing.
Exactly. For the booming desert sands, dryness is absolutely key. One paper you sent specified ideal conditions, below 15% humidity and temperature above 20 Celsius.
Okay, very specific.
But for beach singing sands, they also have their own moisture window. Like really wet sand is usually silent, but adding just a small amount of water can weirdly raise the pitch of the squeak. One of your sources noted that.
That is surprising. You'd think water would just dampen everything.
It shows how complex those surface interactions are. Other crucial things mentioned across your materials. The grains need to be well sorted, meaning they're all pretty much the same size. That uniformity lets them move together, more synchronized.
Gotcha.
And finally, the grain surfaces. They have to be incredibly clean and polished, free of dust, pollution, organic stuff. Even tiny amounts of contamination, as one note pointed out, can silence the sand.
So it's this very specific recipe, isn't it? Precise ingredients, specific environmental conditions. Okay, now let's get into the how. Based on the research you've pulled together, what are the main theories for the sounds from beach sands? the squeaking ones.
Okay, for the squeaking sands, a few ideas pop up consistently in your sources. A leading theory is about friction.
Friction?
Yeah, friction between those super round, clean, same-size quartz grains as layers slide past each other when you step on them. That's called shear.
Huh. So imagine stepping on, like, a bed of tiny, perfectly smooth marbles all rubbing together, making that high-pitched sound.
Sort of, yeah. Another big idea suggests the sound comes from air getting compressed in the tiny spaces between the grains.
Ah, like little air pockets.
Exactly. As you step, you're basically creating countless microscopic air pockets that act like tiny vibrating cushions, maybe. And the third possibility, which was in one of your readings on coastal stuff, involves friction from grains coated with dried salt crystals.
Salt.
Yeah, possibly acting kind of like rosin on a violin bow, creating vibrations.
Interesting. So it could be friction or trapped air, or maybe even salt coatings,
Yeah.
or a mix of these very local things adding up to the squeak we hear.
It could well be a combination, yeah.
Okay, now shifting gears.
Mm.
What about the booming sounds of desert dunes? That feels like something much bigger, more resonant.
It is, yeah. The theories for booming sands, as laid out in your desert ecology papers, they often center on that synchronized movement of the well-sorted dry grains during an avalanche.
Right, the avalanches again.
So as the sand flows down the dune's slip face, under gravity, it's thought to generate pressure waves. Early theories, like in one of your historical geology articles, suggested these waves resonate within the entire dune structure. Like the dune itself is amplifying the sound.
So the whole dune acting like a giant natural musical instrument.
That was a really compelling early model, yeah. Drawing parallels to like the resonant chambers in wind instruments. The frequency, the pitch of the boom, according to some of those older ideas, would depend on the dune's shape and the sand properties.
Okay. But you said early theories, so the thinking has changed.
Well, it's become more nuanced. More recent research, especially in the geophysics studies you provided, suggests something slightly different.
Ah, okay. What are these newer studies pointing towards?
They focus more on the idea of coherent elastic waves, basically sound waves, being generated very near the surface of the dune during the avalanche.
Just near the surface.
Yeah. And the frequency, the pitch of these waves, as one of your more technical papers explains, seems to be mainly controlled by the shear rate. That's the speed difference within a narrow zone, a shear band, separating the flowing sand from the static sand underneath.
Okay.
Essentially, the free surface of that flowing sand layer vibrates almost like the diaphragm of a loudspeaker.
A vibrating layer of sand acting as a massive natural speaker. That's a really powerful image.
It is, isn't it?
And can we predict the pitch, the frequency of this desert song?
Actually, yeah. One of the acoustics papers you shared had a formula trying to link the frequency, let's call it F, to gravity, and the average green size, D. It's roughly F is proportional to the square root of G divided by D. So like F as arrow point 4 GD.
Okay, so there's math behind it. What's the key takeaway from that?
The really interesting thing is the inverse relationship it suggests. Smaller grains tend to mean higher booming frequencies.
Ah, so tiny grains, higher pitch boom.
Exactly. And the observed frequency ranges for booming sands, usually between 75 and 105 hertz. They've been linked to grain sizes around 160 to 340 micrometers, just like that study noted.
So even in these absolutely massive dunes, the properties of the tiny individual grains are dictating the sound. That's amazing.
Precisely. And some of your more recent articles even talk about a potential feedback loop.
A feedback loop? How?
Well, the collisions between the grains and the avalanche can excite these surface waves. And if the vibration frequency of those waves happens to match the collision frequency of the grains...
They reinforce each other.
Exactly. It can lead to synchronization of the grain movement, basically reinforcing and sustaining the booming sound.
A self-amplifying cycle of sound right there in the sand itself. Wow. But hang on, going back to the dune being a resonator... Is that idea completely off the table now?
Well, while the surface wave model has gained a lot of ground, some of the experimental studies you found show that booming sounds can still happen even without a huge, fully formed dune.
Oh, interesting.
Which suggests the main mechanism is probably within the avalanching layer itself, rather than needing the whole dune body to resonate.
That's a pretty significant shift in understanding then. Okay, so these singing sands, they aren't just everywhere, are they? Where do they tend to show up geographically?
It's interesting. Your sources confirm they've been reported on basically all continents. And in a surprising variety of environments, we find them in those dry desert landscapes we've been focusing on.
Right.
But also along shorelines, lakes, rivers, oceans. This broad distribution really underlines that the right conditions can pop up in very different places.
From scorching deserts to, well, breezy beaches. A truly global serenade. What kind of environmental factors seem crucial for setting the stage?
It seems like a sequence is often involved based on your geology and environmental science readings. Often, a wet period might help clean the grains, washing away impurities.
Okay, like a natural washing machine.
Kind of. Then, maybe a dry period follows. And this, maybe combined with the earlier moisture, could help form that thin silica gel-type layer researchers have found on singing sand grains.
That coating.
Yeah. And finally, wind is often key. It helps dry and polish the grains further, and in deserts, it builds up those unstable sand piles you need for the avalanches.
So it's like a natural process. Cleaning, coating, polishing, and piling up.
Yeah.
All to create the right acoustic property.
Exactly. And you see this reflected in the locations. Like your notes mentioned Bruce Peninsula National Park. It has a singing sands beach on Lake Huron. The name itself points to it, right?
Right.
Then you have the classic booming dunes. Kelso and Eureka in California, Great Sand Dunes in Colorado, Mingsha in China, Altan Emel in Kazakhstan. The huge empty quarter in the Middle East is famous for them too. And for beach squeaking sands, your list had places like Kurobikihama in Japan, the Isle of Egg and Porth Ore in the UK, and various spots in North America, Basin Head on PEI, Singing Beach in Massachusetts, even shores along Lake Superior and Lake Michigan.
It really is a worldwide phenomenon, cutting across climates and geology. And it seems, like you mentioned before, that booming sands often show up in those distinctive crescent-shaped dunes, the barchans, and maybe star dunes too.
That's a strong link seen in many of your sources, yes. The shape of the dune itself probably influences how and when these avalanches happen, facilitating the sound.
We've covered the types, the theories, the locations, but what do they actually sound like? Beyond just squeaks and booms, can you give us a more vivid sense?
Well, the booming sounds, based on the descriptions you shared, they range from a deep, resonant roaring or, well, booming, to sometimes, surprisingly, even kind of low-frequency squeaking. It often gets called the Song of Dunes, poetically, and they can be loud, up to 105 decibels in some reports, and last for several minutes, which must be quite captivating.
Definitely. And the squeaking.
Squeaking sounds are just the higher frequency sounds, often compared to cricket chirps or a high musical note. Oh, and interestingly, one of your climate briefs noted that temperature can slightly shift the frequency of the desert songs, too.
A natural symphony, literally tuned by the desert's own heat. It's just astonishing how many factors have to connect perfectly, from the microscopic grain properties to the huge dune dynamics, even the weather, all just to create this unique sound.
It really is something. We've seen how critical the roundness, size, and cleanliness of the grains are. We've talked about the vital role of humidity and wind. And we've dug into the physics, from friction and trapped air on beaches to granular flow and surface waves in deserts.
Yeah.
And that clear difference between the short, high squeaks and the long, low booms really highlights how varied this whole enigma is.
Despite centuries of fascination, from Marco Polo being mystified way back when, to the really sophisticated science we see in the research today, the Song of the Sands still holds this incredible sense of wonder, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It's just like a powerful reminder of the complex, often surprising acoustics hiding in our natural world. Even something as everyday as sand can hold these profound secrets, both scientific and sensory.
It absolutely does. It really encourages us, like you said, to just listen more closely, to pay attention to the world around us, the subtle sounds and the big ones, the familiar and the totally unexpected. Singing sands are just a beautiful example of how much there still is to discover and just appreciate in how nature works.
And speaking of discovery, if this deep dive into the enchanting enigma of singing sands has sparked your own spirit of exploration, we really hope you'll become part of our All Sorts podcast community. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll find a whole treasure trove there of other deep dives into curious corners of the world. Each one is designed to illuminate something unexpected.
Yeah, lots to explore there.
Definitely. Share this sonic journey with others you know who love learning new things, and let's keep the conversation going beyond this deep dive. You can connect with us on X, Instagram, and Threads.
We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. Your insights, your discoveries, they really amplify our collective understanding, and they fuel future explorations. And please, don't forget to check out the many other fascinating deep dives we've already put together. Each one is a unique adventure, just waiting for your ears.
That's right.
Until our next exploration into the wonders of our world, keep listening, keep exploring, and let that spirit of discovery resonate.